Watch this.
Militias are illegal in Idaho as of now, organized or otherwise. But that hasn't stopped several groups organizing together, openly carrying firearms this last couple of years. But if the Idaho National Guard and the governor have their way, militias may be allowed.
Abortion is wrong at any point in the pregnancy because from the moment of conception, a uniquely distinct human being is created.
No one's most personal medical decisions should be controlled by politicians, family members, or anyone else.
Another abortion bill is making its way through the State House. Not surprising, but it does have a lot of people fired up, and the Attorney General concerned. He joined the Marines when he was just 17 and survived one of the most famous battles of World War II. A big reason to celebrate a big birthday for one Boise man. Did you miss it? Maybe the worst kept secret in Idaho. A secret no more. Governor Brad Little is apparently running for governor. How do we find out? Likely just like you. We saw his re-election commercial about an hour ago, right here on KTVB. Now, Little joins an already crowded list, which includes Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan, activist Ammon Bundy, and Ada County GOP Chairman Ed Humphreys. Sandpoint Mayor Shelby Rogstad is also one of two candidates running for governor as a Democrat. And in total, 13 people have thrown their names in to challenge for that office on the second floor. But despite just getting into the race, Governor Little has been fundraising for months, putting together more than $1.4 million. Well, for the last couple of years in office, Governor Little has prided himself on declaring Idaho the least regulated state in the union. To claim that, he's had to cut a lot of red tape, a lot of unnecessary parts of Idaho code. Well, Idaho's military division believes it is helping with that, with House Bill 475. And in simplest terms, it's been labeled as a bill that would allow for militias in Idaho, which are currently illegal. So is it slashing red tape or opening the door for dangerous militias and armed demonstrations? They want to remove language in Idaho code that keeps groups outside of Idaho's National Guard from forming a private militia or parading as a militia in public with firearms in any city or town in Idaho. Some argue the current law ignores First and Second Amendment rights. Others argue it protects Idahoans from dangerous displays and actions from private militias who have no accountability. Well, Joe Paris brings us the debate from the House Transportation and Defense Committee.
A House panel heard testimony Wednesday on removing an entire section of Idaho code that has to do with militias in military parades. Under current Idaho code, it's illegal for a body of men to associate together as a military company or organization or parade in public with firearms in any city or town in this state unless they're called into service of the state. House Bill 475 would remove that section of code from law. Major Steve Stokes with the Idaho Military Division presented the bill, saying it's about cutting back on regulations per Governor Little's request.
IMD submitted proposals in previous years to eliminate outdated and unnecessary statutes. The IMD identified Section 46802 as unnecessary for its operations and proposed to the governor's office and DFM that the section be repealed.
Major Stokes explained to the House committee that the current language in the law is outdated. He points out another issue, too, enforcing it.
The statute does not have a defined enforcement mechanism. There is no assignment of criminal liability attached, so no law enforcement can enforce the provision.
Critics of the bill testified that removing the Idaho code could come with negative and dangerous impacts.
I can think of no time in our nation's history where this law is more needed than today. Bearing in mind the recent anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, as well as the Rittenhouse trial, why would we want to give the green light to vigilantism, lawlessness, and intimidation?
I feel that repealing this law at this time without a replacement in place would be bad form.
In testimony, concerns like those were addressed by Major Stokes, who says there are other parts of Idaho law that cover militias and concerns of terrorism. To be clear, Major Stokes says he's not advocating for or against militias. That's not his job. Rather, cutting red tape per the governor's request. Because the section of code in question is a part of Title 46, Militia and Military Affairs, Stokes argued that editing the law to add clarifying language could infringe on citizens' rights, something not under the purview of Title 46.
If the legislature determines that it needs to add a precise, clearly constitutional, and clearly enforceable provision that restricts the behavior of the general population, it should nest that provision where it needs to be in the criminal code, which is found in Title 18.
All citizen testimony was against the bill, and the House did pass the bill, though, to the full House on a 13-4 vote, with no recommendation to pass or not. Essentially, the committee passed the bill onto the full House for in-depth debate with no recommendation on how they believe lawmakers should vote.
That's something that doesn't happen all that often, to pass it through with no recommendation. But we heard a lot of people from North Idaho today in that testimony.
Yeah, and they were referring to the year 2020, Brian, and if you may have forgotten, back in 2020, there was a rumor that went around the Coeur d'Alene area that there was going to be an Antifa rally or some type of looting in downtown Coeur d'Alene. And because of that, a lot of people showed up in the Coeur d'Alene area dressed in military gear with heavy weapons. Some people argued that they had weapons that were totally inappropriate to be walking around a downtown area with. There was concern, though, in the Coeur d'Alene area about organized militias that are private militias, of course, not part of state-sanctioned events, and they testified today saying we've had incidents here in the last few years that makes us nervous about having militias in our area. So they were concerned that by getting rid of the red tape, so to speak, would have unintended consequences, but it was explained to people that there are other areas of law in Idaho that really take on their concerns.
Yeah, because those people could just show up and say, we're just people with guns, so we're not necessarily a militia. So it seems like it depends on that definition.
Some gray area and nuance there.
All right. Thank you, Joe. All right, round two for Idaho's version of a Texas abortion law. Senate Bill 1309 says abortions would be illegal after 6 weeks, usually around the time a fetal heartbeat is detected, but before many women even know they're pregnant. It goes one step further to say extended family members can sue the doctor for performing that abortion. Dozens signed up to give public testimony today on both sides. Here's Katya Stepovic.
Life begins at conception, and life deserves legal protection at all stages. And so we are saying that right now, with this law, we're going to protect babies with beating hearts.
Blaine Consati, president of the Idaho Family Policy Center and author of Senate Bill 1309, says this bill finishes the work started last year by adding a private enforcement mechanism to Idaho heartbeat law that was signed by Governor Little in 2021. Consati's bill is modeled after Texas abortion law, Senate Bill 8, that limits abortions beyond 6 weeks, in some cases even earlier.
Every person should be able to make their own decisions about their health and their bodies, including abortion. No one's most personal medical decisions should be controlled by politicians, family members, or anyone else.
The bill states that if an abortion were performed, the father, grandparents of the unborn child, or sibling, aunt, or even uncle can sue the provider.
This bill also includes an extreme provision that allows the patient's family members to sue abortion providers with a promise of financial reward, even if they are not involved in the patient's care or the patient's life. This provision attempts to circumvent the rule of law by avoiding legal review, and it's clearly designed to have a chilling effect on abortion care by intimidating and harassing abortion providers.
If I have a one-night stand with a woman this weekend and she goes on to have an abortion, then for the next 4 years, I and my brother and my father each have legal standing to sue the doctor who performed the abortion. That is an absurd scenario because this is an absurd amendment.
Over 20 people gave public testimony regarding the bill, putting those in favor of it at a slight majority.
I believe that every single baby has the right to live, to succeed, and to pursue happiness. The millions of babies lost to abortion is a stain on our rich history, but you each have the power today to preserve the lives of future Idahoans.
Supporters claiming that the bill would prevent up to 800 abortions a year in Idaho.
Within about 22 days from conception, there is already a heart beating. And when abortion is performed, a heart that once was beating is forever stopped and a life is ended. Although our desire is to see abortions completely outlawed in Idaho, enacting SB 1309 would be a huge step in the right direction.
The bill includes exceptions for rape, incest, medical emergency, and for incidents where the baby suffered fetal demise.
I wholeheartedly believe that if I did not have access to an abortion or the choice to make that decision, I would have not been able to reach for my highest potential and would not have been where and who I am today.
Removing bodily autonomy and choice for women will only exacerbate the issue of intimate partner violence for many Idahoans. Idaho is among the loudest states in the country to champion freedom, and I encourage you all to keep that energy when it comes to opposing Senate Bill 1309.
And Brian, there was also concern about if this bill passes, the risk of women getting unsafe abortions or even traveling out of state to do so. The bill passed committee along party lines. It's now heads to the full Senate for debate.
A lot of concern there. Yes, you're right, Katya, and thank you very much. There's also the constitutional angle of this bill, something Senator Grant Burgoyne asked of the Idaho Attorney General's office. And according to the opinion of the office, as explained by Chief Deputy Attorney General Brian Cain, SB 1309 would likely be vulnerable to a lawsuit. Here's some of what he said. It would likely be found to violate recognized constitutional rights under the U.S. Supreme Court's current understanding of the U.S. Constitution. It could violate the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. and the Idaho Constitutions by treating abortion providers differently than other medical providers who violate other state laws. It would also delegate enforcement to private citizens away from the executive branch, which is where it's supposed to be, a violation of separation of powers under Idaho Constitution, Article 4, Section 4. The statutory damages also may violate the U.S. Constitution's Due Process Clause. It could be determined a penalty of $20,000 would be disproportionate and unreasonable. Of course, some of these opinions could change should the U.S. Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. There's also the question of standing when it comes to a lawsuit. There has to be an injured party. With SB 1309, the woman, the father, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a sibling, anyone related to the unborn child could file a lawsuit. Chief Deputy Cain wrote, "It is difficult to see how a competent woman who consented to an abortion could suddenly have suffered an injury. And if she can't, how can anyone else?" Bottom line, Idaho's Attorney General's office says they can see this bill being challenged in court before it is ever enforced and after. By the way, the state of Idaho has been challenged in court on 9 laws passed since 2004, and they've lost 8 of them, 1 of them still pending. On more than a handful of them, they were warned they would be a problem by the state Attorney General's office. We introduced you to Marine Corporal Don Brown yesterday, on the eve of his 95th birthday. Tonight, the rest of the story of Don and his birthday cards. But before we break out the cake, let's make sure we share our number, like we do every day around this time. 208-321-5614. That's the number where you can send us your questions and your comments about the show, or just leave us a voicemail. You know how much we love those. As always, be sure to include your name and the hashtag #the208. But stick around, we could share yours today at the end of the show. We mentioned this a little bit yesterday. We are losing World War II veterans at a rate of 234 a day, every day. Of the 16 million Americans who served in the Second World War, only about 240,000 are still with us today, according to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. And they're all at least or about to be 95 years old. So you can understand why we'd be losing 234 a day and why we should be celebrating those we haven't yet. Don Brown is one of those still with us and celebrating his 95th birthday today. But he's been celebrating this day for weeks now, thanks to his daughter, who lives in Montana. Let me correct that. Dozens of others have been celebrating him, and he's been loving every minute of it. On this block of the Winstead Park neighborhood, the mailman, Harold, has had to carry a heavier load lately.
Mr. Brown, I got another big load for you again.
Mostly because of what he's been bringing to Don Brown's house.
It's not as huge as yesterday, but that's still quite a big pile. Okay. Yeah.
You see, Dawn is turning 95 years old.
All right.
And for some reason,
This one is from New Hampshire, Austin, Texas. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then this is from Connecticut. Oh, you got one from Hawaii, too.
he's been getting a lot of letters
This is from a Mr. George Frederick
from people
in Leesburg, Florida. Do you know any George Fredericks?
Nope.
All right.
he doesn't even know.
Dearborn, Michigan. Ring any bells?
Nope.
All right. This says Rick Notkin in New Hampshire.
Nope.
Nope.
One of the reasons is written right in the cards.
Don Brown, wishing you a wonderful day. Yours is and always will be the greatest generation. My mom and dad were both World War II veterans. God bless you, Mr. Don.
In 1944, Don joined the Marines out of Sioux City, Iowa, at the age of 17.
They took 17-year-olds if your mother signed for you.
Anxious to serve his country.
The war was going on. I was afraid it was going to end before I got in it.
Just days after turning 18, as a member of the 5th Marine Division, Don found himself on a beach in the Battle of Iwo Jima.
They let us crowd the beach of the Marines, and then they opened up on us, and they couldn't miss.
In 4 days, the Marines took Mount Suribachi.
I remember the day they raised the flag.
While that certainly wasn't the end of the battle,
Then we went on from there.
Don would only stay in the Corps another 2 years.
Thinking of you on your birthday.
Then all these years later,
We got more?
these letters
This is from Chelsea in Austin, Texas.
from folks he's never met?
Nope.
How?
It's a big deal. 95 is a big deal.
His daughter, Julie.
He's my hero. He's just amazing. So
Julie wanted to come up with something to top the Civil War cannonball she gave him for his 90th.
I wanted to make it super special.
So she went to social media, posting on an Iwo Jima survivor's Facebook page about her legally blind father who lives alone.
And just said, hey, my dad's going to be 95. It'd be really cool if he could get some cards.
Some cards.
You know, something extra in the mail besides bills and advertisements. And
Julie was just hoping for a handful.
you know, maybe 10, 15 cards.
Then one night, late last month, Don's neighbor Abby stopped by.
He said, I typed this because my handwriting is terrible.
Don told her he's been getting more mail than usual.
And I was like, holy cow, there was a stack of 10, 12 cards from all over America already.
And they just kept coming.
We're up to 124 cards from 33 states and Washington, D.C., 2 from England, 1 from Japan, and a handful of handmade cards from students in junior high classes.
It says, Dear Mr. Brown, my name is Tucker, and my dad and I like to write letters to people that we admire.
And Abby has read him every one,
I'm only 6, so he's helping me type this letter.
turning his big day into a pretty big month.
It's been just really, really special to have something to look forward to every day.
More than a modest response for such a modest man.
He's such a proud Marine. So to know that other people care about his service, it's been an outpouring of love, just absolute love.
It's so heartwarming. It's so powerful. I mean, I tell my family and I tell my friends because it is such a testimony to how much good is left. It says, wishing you a very special birthday from Georgia. Thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
I think it means more than he's even really able to say.
Well, I think somebody's thinking of me anyway.
Lots of somebodies, Don.
America is a better place because of men like you. Happy birthday, Marine, from Mike.
Well, yesterday when we were there with Don, he got 8 more birthday cards. Today, 5 more, plus a box from a school in South Carolina with about 20 cards in it. So far, grand total, about 180 birthday cards for Marine Corporal Brown. Pretty cool. Also pretty cool, Julie says she and her husband took Don birthday shopping today for a new recliner. And they found one, that one right there. And it's sitting in his living room right now. But it took them a little bit longer than they thought because she said Don was stopped and asked for his picture by quite a few people at the Lazy Boy store. There's one right there. Okay, so maybe you're thinking you might want to send Don some birthday greetings. Great. As you can probably understand, though, his daughter wasn't too keen on putting his address out over our air. So here's what we're going to do. If you would like to send something to Don, please send them to us here, care of KTVB, 5407 Fairview Avenue, Boise, Idaho 83706, right around the bottom of your screen there. And we will make sure Don gets those cards, letters, whichever. Happy 95th birthday, Don. As we wrap up the show, let's get to your comments, like this question that Karen has. A lot of people have had this same question over the years. Why doesn't the legislature listen to the AG regarding poorly written bills? The members should split the cost of defending these bills, not the taxpayers. Well, they set up a fund just so they could defend those things. Put the abortion bill on the ballot. Every person in the state has an opinion about this. People need to keep out of others' business, says Marty in Eagle. So, heavy weapons, huh? Were they carrying machine guns? Asked Jeff. Also, what would be an appropriate weapon to carry while exercising your constitutionally guaranteed right? My wife thinks maybe a Nerf gun, maybe a water pistol. I think the intimidation factor was what was implied with some of those, but I get what you're saying. I can think of no better way to recruit more potentially violent domestic terrorists on the right or left to move to the least regulated state in the U.S. than to legalize armed militias, says Steve. How about this one from Ken? The militias could protect us from the CRT indoctrinated school kids in Idaho City. I see what you did there, Ken. That's a good point and a very funny one. We get it. I wish the pro-lifers cared as much for living, breathing folks, poor folks, immigrants, teachers, women, African Americans, as they do for unborn babies, says Paul. A couple more here before we end the show. Just a wild guess. The people opposed to abortion are also against vaccines, selective freedoms, like my husband's selective hearing, asks Peggy in McCall. It's a good point. There's a lot of hypocrisy that people like to point out when it comes to my body, my choice over the last year and a half and even longer in some cases. Enjoy your information show. Information, hopefully some entertainment, some good stories. Thanks for saying so. More information on this show tomorrow. We'll see you then.